Joining me now from the foyer of the House of Commons is James Bezan, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence. Jack Harris is the NDP's Defence Critic, and the Liberal Defence Critic, Joyce Murray, is also here. Welcome, all three of you, to the programme. A couple things let me get out of the way first, Mr. Bezan. CBC News reported on Monday that bombings in Syria could begin a day or two after the motion on the mission was passed in the House. When will Canadian planes begin dropping bombs on Syrian targets?
Well, I'm not going to talk about the issues of operations in the theatre. My understanding is that the letter has already been sent to the UN under Article 51, advising that Canada is going to participate in collective self-defense in Syria against ISIL. And as soon as we start flying there and start doing our reconnaissance and identifying those targets that we believe are a danger to people in the region as well as to Canada, will bomb those accordingly.
Okay, but can you tell us how soon you could begin the targets in Syria?
With the motion passed and with the letter sent to the UN, I would suspect that they could happen as soon as those targets are available.
Okay, and when, can you tell me exactly when the letter was sent?
Yesterday, my understanding is that Minister Nicholson made the announcement that the letter has been sent and has the documentation to table in the House.
Okay, so at any moment now it could start. Finally, you heard this exchange between the Prime Minister and NDP leader Tom Mulcair off the top, when Jason Kenney justifying expanding the mission into Syria by saying that the coalition, the U.S. and Canada, were the only countries with the advanced precision-guided munitions bombs. He made those remarks on this program last week. I'll just show our viewers that.
We have unique capabilities that the other allied air forces operating in Syria do not bring, except the United States, and that is precision-guided munitions. So we can be very effective with our RCAF CF-18s in hitting targets with great precision in Syria, helping to further push back ISIS.
The Chief of the Defence Staff first backed him up, now made a correction. Why was this mistake made?
Well, you base your information as it's available. Definitely the Chief of Defence Staff, General Lawson, his commanders, and Minister Kenney were under the impression that only the United States was using these precision-guided munitions that could hit dynamic targets or moving targets versus the other smart bombs that were being used that hit static targets or stationary targets. So that was where some new information came to light, and the Chief Defence Staff, of course, made the correction in his letter to the editor to the Citizen, and additionally, Minister Kenney today did clarification and took responsibility as the minister for that.
And I appreciate that he took the responsibility, but when you have the Minister of Defence justifying Canada's involvement in the bombing of Syrian targets because we have unique military capabilities, that was used as a primary justification for this.
It wasn't a justification, though, Evan. That was just one of the reasons that we had as a capability. The justification is that ISIL is retracting and coalescing in Syria, and that's where they're launching attacks against Iraq, and that's their basis of operations, and that's why we're going there.
But it was certainly part of the bouquet of justifications. There was an array of them, and Jason Kenney was on this program, and he said one of the reasons we need to do this, no other Western country outside of the U.S. is doing it, is because we apparently had these weapons. If that's not true, does it concern you that the Minister of Defence didn't know that other allies, there's only, 6 of them, have the same capabilities in the bombing?
To me, it might be unfortunate that we didn't have all the information when the statements were made, but we have to come back to the basis of why we're there. ISIL is a threat to Canada. This is their basis. That's where they want to headquarter their caliphate, out of their so-called capital of Raqqa, and that's where they have coalesced their operations because they've been getting the snot kicked out of them in Iraq. So they are withdrawing. They're taking the fighters there. That's where the training is. That's where their munition caches are, and that's where they have all their heavy equipment and building their improvised explosive devices. Okay. So we have to hit those targets, and they need the help to do it because, as you mentioned, there's only 6 nations bombing there. We're the 7th versus what's happening in Iraq with a lot more coalition partners involved in the Iraq fight.
Jack Harris, are you concerned about this? I mean, the minister has now taken responsibility, made the correction. Are you concerned about that?
What I'm concerned about, Evan, is that as each day goes on, the statements by the Minister of Defence become less and less credible. We need a Minister of Defence who can tell the difference between fact and fiction. We don't have that right now.
Base it on the
and we don't.
not.
He says he's basing what he's been told, but what he told this House of Commons and Canadians was that was why we were requested. Now, I don't know who did the requesting, but he said we were requested because we had that capability and other nations didn't. The information out of the Joint Task Force headquarters for the whole operation, for the combined operation, is that all of the countries that are doing airstrikes in Syria, all 5 of them have the same capability. They use precision-guided weapons and nothing else, as well as the 9 countries, Australia and all the rest, that are doing that in Iraq. They all have it too. So this is the complete array of people who are doing this are only using precision-guided weapons. The Minister of Defence doesn't know that and claims that we were asked specifically because of the capability that we have. So we don't believe what he's saying, and I don't think there's a basis on which to believe it. And frankly, if that's the basis on which we're going into Syria, then we've got a very, very serious problem with the leadership of this country and the leadership of the Ministry of Defence.
Okay, I want to get Joyce Murray on that, but also the minister also confirmed that the price tag of the mission is $406 million on top of the $122 that's already been spent. Do you think the department should release these numbers more quickly? They refused to release them. Now they're finally been released.
Well, yes, of course they should, as our allies are doing. Canadians deserve to know what is being invested here. But I want to go back to the minister's mistruth there. I mean, does it remind you a bit of a president of the United States saying he has to go bombing in Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction? I mean, I have to say that Canadians deserve...
But to be fair, are you making a comparison? I mean, why would you make that comparison here?
Well, I'm saying that we need a Minister of Defence who is capable of taking decisions with his serious and responsible portfolio that he has. And there are real questions about his capability. He did mislead Canadians about that rationale for bombing in Syria. And now he's essentially saying, well, the dog ate my homework. It's somebody else's fault. I was
he took responsibility for it.
But the reality is, Evan, that this has been a pattern in just the last 2 weeks.
Do you want him to step down? What's the consequence in your view?
I think he has to acknowledge that he was wrong and that he misspoke.
He did, but he did acknowledge that.
He actually blamed it on someone else. And it concerns me that the Chief of Defence Staff, I hope that this minister is not leaning on the Chief of Defence Staff, who came out a few days ago with a different statement that kind of supported the minister's incorrect assertion about allies not having this capability. So I hope he's not leaning on his Chief of Defence Staff. Now the Chief of Defence Staff has come out and flatly contradicted what the minister's statement was in the first place.
Can I get to I got about a minute here, and I want to get James, but I want to go back to something that you just said. You said we've got to bomb Syria because I'm going to quote you. You said ISIS is getting the snot kicked out of them in Iraq, and I know. So a couple things. If they're getting the snot kicked out of them in Iraq, how long before they're defeated in Iraq? We have heard from the generals that's going to take years. What does that mean?
But look, what I meant by that, maybe it's a little too colorful, but you know, the coalition has been able to take back 25% of the land and communities that were previously held by ISIL. And in addition, remember when we went in there, ISIL was on the march for Baghdad. That was not only stopped, but we've been able to chase a lot of their people and equipment back into Syria. Now that they're back in Syria, that's where we have to focus our efforts, and that's why we're going there, is making sure that they aren't continuing to commit their genocide that we've been witnessing all too well. If you're going to deliver humanitarian aid, you've got to bring security to the region.
I agree. So can you confirm, there's a very critical battle with the Iraqi forces for the city of Tikrit. It was taken over by ISIS. They claimed a big victory there. We're hearing that now Tikrit has been lost, that ISIS has been pushed out. Can you confirm that?
I haven't heard. I know that this battle has been going on, and that it has had its ebbs and flows. And like anything, there's going to be, as we can witness in any war, there's going to be victories. There's going to be battles lost and gained. By the end of the day, we got to make sure that ISIL is degraded to the point that Iraq can get control of their own security in the region, and ultimately that we can bring some sort of peace and security into Syria as well.
Okay, I got about 30 seconds, Mr. Harris. Ms. Murray, any concern about the figure, the cost of the mission coming in at about $500 million?
Well, you know, the report on planning and priorities was supposed to contain those figures. They didn't contain those figures. Now we got the minister using a figure. Where did he get it? Can we trust it? Is it believable? We now have a serious credibility problem. We had that before on Libya when the minister, the then minister, Peter MacKay, offered a number which was off by a factor of 100%.
Okay, can I add something?
And we also have the full cost being 4 or 5 times what the so-called incremental cost is. So we don't really know, frankly, and we don't have a lot of faith in the numbers.
But it appears to be in the billions.
No, it's not, and that's completely misleading.
Well, with full costs, absolutely.
If you look at it, though, the reports and plannings and priorities that was tabled was done and signed off on March 9th. This is even before the decision was made to go ahead with the mission, before it even went to cabinet. And we're talking that it's going to be
now we got 400 million plus one.
Plus 122. And you know what? We have to say
that has lost trust and credibility of the
minister
public
has been
with a series of misspeaks.
I can't hear you.
Very
real quick,
humble.
Mr. Bezan.
So the minister has been, conducting himself with humility, especially with the information that he was given and had to correct it. And he's working hand in hand with the Canadian Armed Forces, with the Chief of Defence Staff. And you only get information, even for a military, that you don't always have.
When you say your country has been asked because you must have been involved in the asking.
No, the United States actually did indicate that was
they didn't ask anybody else, or did they ask them and they said no?
Well, possibly, but maybe there's still a decision.
I got to leave it there, but listen,
credible and responsible minister, and they don't have that.
All right, I got to leave it there, but the debate about this mission continues. We have no confirmation as to when the bombing in Syria could start, but as Mr. Bezan said, it could start imminently. James Bezan, Jack Harris, Joyce Murray, always great to have the three of you on, and a passionate debate. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Evan.
Coming up.